Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and quite a few people have asked me to cover this already. This is something that Rich Piana put out about a week ago from what I can see. I went and pulled a copy of it, and everyone wants to know my thoughts on Rich Piana's steroid cycle. Now, a lot of you guys know that I am not a fan of Rich Piana. I think he is a complete moron when it comes to PEDs, and his knowledge of them is horrifically bad. And his advice on them is just in general very, very bad. I respect him as a businessman. I think his business model is amazing. He's very successfully making six figures because he knows how to capitalize and market to really stupid people who will do things like pay $8 for a water jug with a 10-cent logo put on it. So I got to give him credit for that. He knows how to capitalize on stupidity very effectively. He's got a very good business sense. But as far as his knowledge of drugs, they're horrifically bad. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, what he's doing is clearly working for him. And it's like, wouldn't you expect it to? Wouldn't you expect someone who for decades has run grams of gear at a time with growth hormone and everything else? I mean, if you ran blast that contained over 2 grams of gear plus $1,000 of growth hormone a month off and on for 15 or 20 years while lifting weights and eating a lot of food, wouldn't you expect somebody to be big? Even if they didn't understand anything about how to get the most out of the drugs, they're going to make gains. You would make gains on that even if you didn't lift weights. If you just sat around on your ass, you would make gains. So it's impossible for him to not get gains. He's using hefty doses of anabolic drugs and big cocktails. And the other thing is, guys, it's really hard to tell how big Rich is because when you look at him, anyone who knows what they're looking at knows that Rich has a lot of fake muscle on his body. When you look at his delts in his arms, he has large amounts of PMMA injections, which is collagen that he has injected there. Plenty of people have come out and talked about it. I believe at one point one of his exes came and talked on the forum about how he used to get them down in Mexico, and the look that he has in his arms and delts is indicative of heavy amounts of collagen injections put in there. That's the look that gives. That is a characteristic look. That's a reason his muscles don't really move right or do anything, because the collagen is over the muscles. All his muscles are underneath there. Now, because he has so much of it, we can't tell how big he really is. We have no idea how big Rich really is because of all of that collagen there. We don't know if the collagen's adding 4 inches to his arms, 6 inches, 8 inches. I can't tell. You can't tell either. I promise you can't tell. He has too much of it. Same thing with his delts, possibly even some side injection in his traps and chest. Well, when you look at his legs and back, they're pretty big though, but not necessarily proportionate to all that fake muscle he has. So yeah, he's very big, but it's hard to tell how big he really is because of all of the fake muscle there. But he should be big. He blasts insane amounts of drugs. That is not even in question that he is big though. So let's kind of break down what he did here. And I'm going to cover this in a voiceover because that way you guys have a reference above. It'll be a lot easier for me to edit and render this video without taking forever to get it up to you guys. And you'll have a direct frame of reference. Instead of looking at my face, you can look at his actual cycle. So I'm going to put that up here for you guys right now. All right, guys, as we go, I'm going to break this down page by page. That's just showing you guys a quick overview. One of the first things that concerns me is how kind of poorly organized he did this in his presentation. He organized a lot of this just for his own injection schedule, not to actually teach you guys what he's doing, because he didn't give us all of the information. And he really should have done this on like a big Excel spreadsheet or something. It would have been so much easier for people to read and understand what's going on. And let's go ahead and look at some of it. Let's break it down kind of page by page. All right, a lot of things that Rich does here make sense and a lot of it doesn't make sense. One of the things I noticed immediately, take his week 1, and his week 1 is really aggressive. He's got it split up into 3 injection days. He's running kind of an old school theory here of where you combine a different type of drug base together. He's got testosterone, he's got deco, which is slang for nandrolone decoinate. He's got MASP, which is again kind of a street name for drosolone propionate. What he's kind of done here is combine together a testosterone-based substance, so you've got test as a base. None of the other two are testosterone derivatives. The DECA, or nandrolone, is actually a progestin derivative that's been made androgenic and anabolic. And then the drostanolone is actually a DHT-based compound that was originally an anabolic steroid designed to treat breast cancer. So he's combined these 3 together because there used to be an old school theory that they hit the receptors a little differently, and that by combining those 3 different schools of hormones together, you create a synergistic effect. Not necessarily true, but there is some merit to the idea because of maybe some potential androgens cross receptor binding. But that's really not true, because it turns out that nandrolone is actually very SARM-like compared to most other steroids. It's really the testosterone that has the non-androgen receptor mediated activity, whereas the other two are just more direct. Although, like the drostanolone, will bind to the androgen receptors of fat tissue and breast tissue a little more. It actually may potentially have some ability to reduce gynecomastia and definitely body fat due to its androgenic profile. But I mean, it's a proven combination. It's an old school combination. A lot of guys, a lot of serious bodybuilders back in the 80s used to run. And then he's combining it with some HGH. Now, when you look at the doses, because he didn't really give us any indication of what he is using, because he just put milliliters. He didn't give us milligrams. He didn't do that till the final week. So we just have to assume that he's running a standard 250 test milligram, 250 nandrolone, and 100 milligram prop. So at half a milliliter of each, we're starting off with 125 tests, 125 deca, 50 prop, all 3 times a week. So you end up with 300 milligrams times 3. So he's running 900 combined milligrams of steroids plus 2 1/4 units of HGH. Now, if he's running a legitimate pharmaceutical grade HGH, his first week is very, very aggressive. Like for a guy my size, I'm 215, 5'9". If I were to go on that stack that he runs in week 1, the weakest point in his stack with that growth hormone added in, pharmaceutical grade, that's a $500-600 of growth hormone a month being used right there, plus like a gram of combined gear almost. I would probably gain easily 5 to 10 pounds of muscle that I would keep at the end. And while I was on it, I would look dramatically different. If I were to jump on a stack like that, you guys would be like, oh shit, Jason's getting big real fast. It's pretty aggressive. So when I look at that, I'm like, okay, he's already got an aggressive stack, but there's some things that concern me with the first few weeks that don't really make sense. The way he spaces out his drugs, okay, he's got 3 injections a week. Masteron prop, that is actually pretty good. 3 times a week is going to keep the blood levels pretty stable. Some guys like to use that every day. But then he's taking tests enethate. Now, some guys do like to run it twice a week for more stable blood levels. I personally think, just looking at the biochemistry of it, the way it works in the body, overhyped to inject it several times a week. But he's running deca several times a week. Nandrolone decoinate has almost a 2-week half-life. Spreading it out over 3 days a week when it takes 3 to 4 weeks to even build up in your system, trying to keep the blood level stable, just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't understand why he's doing that, why he's taking these longer chain esters and pitting them 3 times a week, other than he just wants the convenience of doing them all together at one time. Which is fair enough if that's his goal, but it looks a little weird. I don't quite grasp what he's doing. The thing that really bothers me is when you start going to the next weeks, though, he is tapering the drugs up. Or the medical term titrating, and it's like he goes to week 2 and he increases everything 50%. So he's on about 1,400 total milligrams for just 1 week of all the same stuff. Then he doubles his growth hormone. All right, that's the thing. You look at that growth hormone dose all the way through, and that's something that's pretty heavy. You guys need to understand that if that is legitimate pharmaceutical grade growth hormone, 72 unit kits of legit stuff, not this cheap Chinese generic junk, but if you're using real growth hormone, 4.5 units every day is actually really strong. That's going to have a massive synergistic effect with his stack. His drug stack, when you go to week 2 with that much growth hormone, is insane. That should be yielding insane gains for anybody just because of the total doses. But you need to understand that those, if he's buying the 72 unit kits divided by 4.5, that's 16 days he runs out of kit. He pretty much goes through 2 kits every month at that sort of dose. Those kits, the cheapest I have ever seen them in legit pharmaceutical grade is $500 to $600. They go for, on the streets where I live, I've seen them as high as $800 to $1,000 on the streets per kit here. So you figure he's probably really well connected, paying $500. That's $1,000 worth of growth hormone a month. That's pretty crazy. Week 3 he goes up again. Why is he titrating the doses on long chain esters like test enethate and deca? It takes deca several weeks to even build up in your system to appropriate blood levels because it's such a slow acting drug, but he's titrating it up. If anything, someone would probably front load it. We can argue about the merits of that, but he's titrating up over 3 weeks. his drugs, and it's really silly. It makes no sense. Why would you even do that? There's no logic behind that. There's no biological reason in the body you would do that. There's no medical doctor who would write prescriptions for someone who needed large doses for muscle wasting or anything who would do something so silly. There's no benefit. He's just kind of being silly. I don't understand his logic there. All right, then week 4, rather than titrate up any further and go higher on his dose. All right, week 4, rather than increase the doses, he adds another drug in. He adds D-bol, as he calls it. It's called D-bol would be the slang term, not D-bol, Rich. 20 milligrams twice a day. So that's 40 milligrams of D-bol. We're sitting here now at 600 milligrams 3 times a week of his combined other stack. That's a lot. That's 1,800 plus 40 milligrams of D-bol times 7, 280. He's on 2.1 grams of combined anabolic steroids and testosterone, plus 4.5 units of growth hormone now at this point, going into week 4. All right, it kind of gets silly. The other stack is really good. You start throwing D-bol into a mix like that, though, with that much DECA, that much test, you're just asking for side effects. And I know Rich believes in this weird theory that different drugs, even different esters, bind to different receptors. That's not true in the body. DECA, testosterone, D-bol, none of that bind to different androgen receptors or bind to the receptor differently other that some are weaker or stronger. Test binds to it fairly strongly. DECA binds to the androgen receptor even more strongly. It just doesn't have the other non-androgen receptor-mediated effects of test. D-bol binds to it weakly, much weaker, about 40% of the rate of testosterone, but because of the way the drug is manufactured, it stays in the bloodstream once it's released for far, far longer, sometimes 30 or 40 times longer for the same molecule, giving it more time to bind. By throwing that in there, a weaker binding drug, when you're already pretty well androgen receptor saturated with all these stronger binding androgens, all the D-bol is going to do at this point is elevate side effects. There's going to be more of it floating in the bloodstream longer, being displaced on the androgen receptor by the stronger drugs. All that's going to do is add water bloat to you, basically. It's going to bloat more water without necessarily more muscle gains. But again, he's trying to buy into this, adding new stuff to bind to the receptors differently. And it's a little silly. It's not logical. It's not how the body works, but I understand what he's trying to do. All right, then let's hop over to the next slide and get to the next set of weeks. All right, we get to week 5, and what you see is that he tries to increase his D-bol. He keeps everything the same through the week 5, but he starts titrating the D-bol up. He has another 20 milligrams of D-bol every day, pushing himself up to about just over 2.2 grams, but keeping everything the same. And it's just like he's titrating stuff up for no reason. There's no medical or scientific reason whatsoever to do that. It's an old school theory that's never really panned out. So he gets done with week 5, and then he decides to just change his drugs around a little bit, and it's just completely arbitrary. He ran 5 weeks of doing it one way, so then he switches over, and while keeping the same amount of drugs in the stack, he just switches the injection protocol. Again, maybe he's trying to mess with some weird receptor thing, but he jumps over and finally just says, okay, I'm going to do 3 cc's of the Test E on Monday, 3 cc's of the DECA on Wednesday, and 3 cc's of the Masteron on Friday. So now he's using probably the Test and DECA at appropriate injections instead of spreading them out. He's just bursting them all at once, which is fine for those long-chain esters. In fact, injecting DECA more than once a week doesn't make sense. He's finally making sense there, but then he jumps over and takes the Masteron prop, which is in and out of your body within like 72 hours. A half-life, the actual active half-life on it is really something like 24 to 30 hours. So he then pins it all on Friday, and by Monday it's completely out of his system. One of the reasons you use Masteron is that it's an anabolic that can mitigate some of the negative side effects of some of the other drugs. So he's bursting it all at once, and then the days when he's going to peak, his testosterone Test D is more of a medium chain ester in a way. He's going to pin it Monday, it's going to peak on Tuesday and Wednesday. That's when it's going to give the most side effects. He's not even taking his Masteron. His Masteron is completely out of his system by then. So just to randomly change things up for no reason at all for this next 3-week burst, he just changes his injection order to one that makes sense for some of the drugs, and it takes the Masteron abilities and its benefit completely out of the equation because he's just bursting it all on Friday and none of it through the rest of the week. It's completely insane. There's no logic behind that other than he believes that receptors get hit differently, and by maybe spreading them out, he'll affect his receptors differently because they use different receptors. And that's the only logic he might have. And then he repeats this process for 3 weeks Sort of, because then he gets to week 7, he increases the D-bol because he made a change. He seems to have to change something every week or he thinks he's not going to make progress. So he changes the D-bol. Once he's changed the rotation on week 6, he goes over, changes the D-bol, adds another 10 milligrams every day. Actually 20 because it's 10 twice a day. So again, 20, another 140 milligrams. Then week 8, he just does the same thing with a weird injection with the Masteron, and he goes to 50 milligrams of D-bol twice a day. All right, guys, that's 100 milligrams of D-bol a day combined with 1,800 milligrams of injectables. That's 2.5 grams every single week that he's now running, along with 4.5 units of growth hormone. That is an insane stack. The fact that he could run a stack like that and even need all that collagen and everything in his arms to try to be as big as he is actually suggests that he's really not optimizing his drugs. He really doesn't understand how to utilize and combine these drugs together to get the most benefit. And it's very obvious by the way he rotates his injection schedule around during the first 8 weeks. All right, but let's go ahead and hop over to his final block after looking at this taper up to 2.5 grams with a ton of growth hormone. And let's see how he finishes this bad boy out. All right, I am really not impressed again with what I'm seeing here. He's going back to this same idea of just changing drugs to change receptors. Now, what I will say, his final 4 weeks is going to be a much drier stack. He's probably going to get a lot more vascular and maybe harder looking from this because he's pulling out all that heavy dose of nandrolone that he was running in there and swapping it out for tren. But this is the sort of stuff he does that doesn't make any sense. He just decides to change his drugs here, but what he does up front, he goes over to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and he ran earlier in there, was running test enethate at once a week shots for the past month. All of a sudden, he goes to an even slightly longer chain ester, test cypionate. Test cypionate has a slightly longer half-life than test enethate. So it has a more stable blood level. And what does he do? He goes back to injecting it 3 times a week. So you look Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he's running this combination to where he's got test cypionate injected 3 times a week. I can understand tren enethate. Some guys mess with that and find that because of the volatile nature of the side effects of trenbolone, that tren enethate for some people gives lower side effects on a higher injection frequency. But then he's got EQ, that's boldenone and dicyclinate, literally just about the longest lasting anabolic steroid ever invented. In fact, that's one of those that when people inject a hefty dose, it still shows in their bloodstream a month after the injection sometime. And he's injecting it 3 times a week. And let's see how much gear he's using, because tren is really strong. And so he's got 300 milligram test sip. So he's got 900 milligrams of test right up front. Bam. 200 milligrams of tren E 3 times a week for 600 milligrams of tren. That's a pretty hefty dose. And then EQ, which is a milder drug, at 253 times a week for 750 a week. Again, he's jumped over to a lot of gear immediately, switching over these esters. So we're looking at 750 per injection day, 2.2 grams, 2250. Again, combined with all the growth hormone. However, he threw an oral in. He threw an Anadrol at 25 milligrams twice a day. Anadrol is a very strong, very high side effect anabolic. And again, he's going back to saying, of why is he trying to run 4 different drugs at every given time? There's no point in it. They don't hit different receptors. When you start stacking this many drugs together, all you're doing is potentially increasing your side effects. And again, you start stacking high test with high tren with Anadrol, you're getting a really high side effect stack at this point. And he's throwing in EQ, I guess, just for the additional benefits of EU, because it is one of the mildest side effect drugs. It produces virtually no negative side effects at the doses he's running. But so 50 milligrams of Anadrol a day, you throw that in, and you add in his other stuff, he's sitting at 2.6 grams. So he didn't go down on anything. He went up to 2.6 grams. Of, again, a combination that, again, makes sense. I don't know why he's trying to throw Anadrol in with this other drier stack other than he wants to look thicker and fuller. But with so much test in there already, he's probably not going to get thicker and fuller from Anadrol. He's just going to bloat because, again, Anadrol has a fairly weak androgen receptor binding affinity. It stays in the bloodstream a long time because of the 17 alpha alkylated nature of it. So all he's doing with that oral that he's throwing into this already very, very aggressive stack is just increasing his side effects. And let's keep in mind, he's been running pretty high doses of orals for like 8 weeks now. I'm not sure that I would advise people do that. I hope he doesn't drink alcohol at all. But he's running this hefty dose of all of these, but again, running the really, really long chain esters 3 times a week. There's no logic to that. And then we get over to week 10. He does the same thing he did before. He keeps his injectables all the same, and then he increases the orals. So he adds another 50 milligrams of Anadrol a day total for another 350. So he's up to 3 grams now with all this Anadrol, 100 milligrams of Anadrol thrown in every day, on top of it over 2 gram high side effect stack. All he's doing is increasing his side effects. It's stupid at this point. What is he doing? Week 11 does the same thing, increases the Anadrol again to 150 milligrams a day, which is now we're getting to a hefty dose of Anadrol. Combine that with his other stack, he's sitting at 3.3 grams the final week. Just tapering up the entire time. It's weird because he started at 900 milligrams and tapers up through the entire cycle. That is silly. It doesn't make any sense to do that. All these injectables are going to taper up over time anyways, all these long chain injectables. So his androgen load is just getting higher and higher and higher as he goes. Then he does the weirdest thing. He gets to week 12 because he's run 3 weeks of the same injection schedule. He seems to have to change it all the time because he really believes in this weird 3-week receptor theory that is no basis in science or anything that happens in the human body. It's just a weird internet theory that doesn't actually work. It doesn't actually work or do anything. And he just changes his injections back to this weird setup to where he goes test C all on the first day. So he blasts all of his test C on one day, all of his Trin E on another day, and then all of his equipoise on another day. Why is he doing that? He's been running them on a 3-day-a-week injection, and he just switches them around because he seems to think he has to change something on the injection schedule every 3 weeks. It's just, there's no point to doing that. And it's just funny because he didn't even do the right order. He basically took the test C, which is the middle acting out of the 3, the Trin E, then immediately, so he's going to get a burst throughout the week. And then while they're starting to try to taper down, he injects the longest lasting non-testosterone substance on Friday. So that's the one that's going to be in the system longest anyways. He throws it in at his very last injection before he starts his PCT. That big shot of 750 EQ is going to be lingering around in his system for a month, suppressing his HTPA when he goes into his PCT that he does. And here's the thing we need to look at with Rich's PCT. This is a guy who, when he talks about the kind of HCG doses he does between cycles, he is never really off, because his HCG doses are not only insanely expensive, but they're so high that they can damage your body over time, but they make your body produce the amount of testosterone that is as if he was taking like 500 milligrams of test. So they actually make his body produce 3 to 4 times the amount of testosterone most 18 to 20-year-old males produce. And he's calling that off cycle or being off. So he's technically on a blast dose because of the HCG that most guys out there could still be making gains on, and that's his downtime after a 12-week cycle like this. But his cycle is just insane. There's the rhyme or reason behind it shows that Rich doesn't really understand how these drugs work in the body. He tapers up randomly. He feels the need to just randomly taper drugs, but he basically tapers up literally every single week of this cycle. His total milligrams per week increase every week up to week 11 until week 12, and they don't increase them, but he just randomly changes the injection schedule to something very arbitrary and probably not even ideal if he wants to come off in cycle, because he throws in the longest acting drug that's not even a testosterone is his very last injection, when he probably should have reversed those around and did it the other way. Probably, if he was going to do that, which is weird enough, he probably should have thrown it on Monday and did a test on Friday. And then he'll go into his PCT. And again, his PCT, guys, remember, is so aggressive that it of itself could count as gains, because he tends to run the high HCG and sometimes even throw growth hormone in there. But what we need to look at is the cost of a stack like this. You figure that This stack, if he's buying legitimate quality products, even at the best prices out there available, he is probably spent between $4,000 and $5,000 on this 12-week blast that he did. So put that into perspective, people. That's again $4 to $5 grand that he just spent if he bought quality products and everything is legit and good to go. So I hope he gets big off of it. I mean, you're spending that type of money, you better be monstrous. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.